Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Lead Church of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we are on day 197. We're covering Day Verbum 15 to 16 on the Old Testament prepares us for Christ. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about how God planned out our salvation. He chose Abraham and then the Jewish people to make covenants with. Today we are going to talk about how the Old Testament reveals truth and prepares us for Jesus, and the two testaments are best interpreted through each other. Remember, yesterday and today we're covering chapter 4 of the Old Testament. Both days are a little shorter, under 300 words from the documents each day. So let's begin with chapter 15. There are no subparagraphs either chapter today, so the summary of chapter 15 is that the Old Testament reveals truth. So let's read the text. 15. The principal purpose to which the plan of the Old Covenant was directed was to prepare for the coming of Christ, the Redeemer of all, and of the Messianic kingdom, to announce his coming by prophecy, see Luke 24, John 5, 1 Peter 1, and to indicate its meaning through various types, see 1 Corinthians 10. Now the books of the Old Testament, in accordance to the state of mankind before the time of salvation established by Christ, reveal to all men the knowledge of God and of man, and the ways in which God, just and merciful, deals with men. These books, though they also contain some things which are incompatible and temporary, nevertheless show us true divine pedagogy. These same books, then, give expression to a lively sense of God, contain a store of sublime teaching about God, sound wisdom about human life, and a wonderful treasure of prayers. And in them the mystery of our salvation is present in a hidden way. Christians should receive them with reverence. One word here that's used a few times is the word types or typography. So the types or typography does not mean like the font you're using or typing on your computer or things like that. Here it means something which is a symbol or representation of something else. For example, you talk about the type of the tabernacle, which contains the old tabernacle, not the modern one. If we're talking about let's say the Ark of the Covenant better than the tabernacle, because the tabernacle was the tent which the Ark was in. So let's just use the Ark of the Covenant. And we'll sometimes say Mary is the Ark of the Covenant. Well, why do we say that? That's a typological analysis, because Mary has Jesus in her womb, just like the Ark of the Covenant had the 10 Commandments and the manna and Aaron's staff in it, right? And so that's the idea of a type. So there are types like that in the Old Testament for Mary, for Jesus. You can talk about the 12 tribes as types of the 12 apostles, things like that. That's what we mean by types here. This isn't the most common use of the word here, but in the theological circles, it's a pretty common use. I just know that, like, usually when I think of type outside of this, it's what font are you using? How are you hitting the keys with your fingers? Things like that. So let's go on to the several sentences here. The first sentence, the Old Testament prepares us for Jesus, right? He's announced to the prophet. The Old Testament leads us to him. The goal of the Old Testament is to prepare, to lead towards the one fulfillment, because Jesus' death on the cross and resurrection on the third day is the center of history. So everything before him is leading towards him, and everything from him is leading from him, the building up. So the church builds up, goes to the 12 apostles, to the early church, to the modern 1.3 billion Catholics in the world. And then we talk about revealing truth about God pre-incarnation, right? What kind of truths are revealed? Reveal that God has laws. God has ethical standards. God is true. God is faithful. God is being itself, right? Exodus 3, the burning bush again. And those things are true about God, and they can be revealed about God without revealing Jesus Christ, the incarnate Son of God. And this shows the divine pedagogy. God is trying to help us understand him through a pedagogical lens. Some things are temporal, right? There's a possible henotheism in the text, in the sense in certain parts of the Old Testament. And henotheism just means that you worship one God, although you don't deny the existence of other gods. We are monotheists. All these other gods are false or are, misunderstandings of our God or our demons or something like that. But a henotheist is someone who has like my God for my religion. The certain parts of the Old Testament kind of refer to this, but the gods, the other peoples are still really gods. But as God makes it clearer, it becomes clearer. No, it's just this one God, and all the other gods, they aren't just not to be worshipped. They aren't really gods. And that's something of a divine pedagogy, leading from where they were, from the kind of polytheism they are surrounded with, to worship just the one God, them, and to realize that is the only God later on. And there's lots of good on their own, right? There's wisdom, there's sublime teaching, there's the prayers, right? As a priest, I pray the Liturgy of the Hours every day, and we pray the Psalms every 4 weeks, all the Psalms, all 150. Well, actually, I think like 147 or 148. There's a few that aren't usually prayed by Catholic priests in the Liturgy of the Hours. And they aren't in the liturgy. This is not the place to talk about it, but there's a few that are just a little aggressive towards certain things. It's like let the enemy, the children of my enemies have their heads smashed on rocks and things like that can be taken out of context too easily. So those kind of things. And we need reverence for the Old Testament is the last thing. How do we do it? Do we read it in our own prayer? Let's do it in the liturgy, or just kind of think, let's skip forward to what's more important? No, in the liturgy, it's important to listen, to hear what the Old Testament has to say. Because one of the things I actually had in my notes for the next paragraph, but it's important, is the idea that when we set up the liturgy, we set up the readings to connect with each other. So when you go to Mass and there's a first reading and a gospel, those should have some kind of connection most of the time. In the Sunday Masses, the second reading, the letter of St. Paul, does not always have a connection. Sometimes you just read those sequentially and not directly with a connection with the rest. But the Psalm and the Old Testament and the other Old Testament reading, well, usually Old Testament during Easter, it's from Acts. The first reading is that should connect us to the gospel and show us a fuller understanding of those different passages together. That Psalm, that Old Testament reading, that gospel. By putting them together in the liturgy, the church wants to teach us something. So let's move on to paragraph 16, which is where I had the notes for that last point I made. So paragraph 16 talks about how the Old Testament and New each point to each other and reveal each other. You can see how I have that point. Honestly, the first sentence here is one of the most beautiful sentences of all of Vatican II documents. It's one you can really sit and meditate on for a long time and use in your prayer and all kinds of things. And then there's a second sentence, but let's read it. God, the inspirer and author of both Testaments, wisely arranged that the New Testament be hidden in the Old, and the Old made manifest in the New. For though Christ established a new covenant in his blood, see Luke 22, 1 Corinthians 11, still the books of the Old Testament with all their parts, caught up in the proclamation of the gospel, acquire and show forth their full meaning in the New Testament, see Matthew 5, Luke 24, Romans 16, and 2 Corinthians 14, and in turn shed light on it and explain it. So this beautiful line of them manifesting and revealing each other, right? The New Testament be hidden in the Old, and the Old made manifest in the New. That is such a beautiful line. We see that in the liturgy. We see how they're connected. We see how when we read, for example, Isaiah 53 about the suffering servant, it really helps us understand the passion narratives in the gospel. When we read that Jesus went up a mountain and started proclaiming the Beatitudes, we connect that with Moses. He goes up the mountain, he gets the New Testament, the 10 Commandments. So there's a connection of the law coming from on the mountain and things like that. And so we see how they reveal in each other the connection between the Beatitudes and the 10 Commandments, or the connection between Isaiah's suffering servant and the Passion. Those things are beautiful to understand. And so this is important, that the whole Old Testament sheds light in the gospel, sheds light on the New Testament. You don't just put it away, right? There was actually a heresy, Marcionism, way back in the day that said Old Testament is completely useless. But that's not Catholic teaching. No. We understand that the Old Testament is valuable, and we use it to shed light on the New Testament. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce another great podcast at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with the next paragraphs of Dave Airbroom, which is 17 and 18, on the priority of the New Testament, especially the Gospels. The Old Testament is valuable. We've talked about the last 2 days, but we are moving on to the New Testament, which is more valuable. It has that priority, as I noted there. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. If you want more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.
Amen.